A single forged poem ignites a trail of blackmail, deceit, and murder across Manhattan's literary elite, until Wolfe and Archie uncover the truth hiding in ink and lies. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the Affair at the Poets' Pavilion. A drizzle was giving Madison Avenue the kind of polish that makes even a used Packard look like it has prospects when the morning mail landed on my desk. The envelope on top was heavy, cream-coloured, and perfumed enough to make me wonder if Fritz had decided to serve Eau de Poet for lunch. The calligraphy on it curled like a cat stretching, Mr. Nero Wolfe, West 35th Street, New York City. No return address, but the wax seal carried a design I recognized from society pages, a laurel wreath around a quill. The Poets' Pavilion, where art met income tax evasion. I slit it open, careful not to mar the embroidery of the script. Inside was an engraved card inviting Wolfe to an urgent consultation on a matter of literary discretion. Signed, Marjorie Vale. The name rang faint bells from the gossip columns. She'd been the widow of Adrian Vale, the poet whose verses were better known for what they cost to print than what they said. He'd died last year of too much applause and not enough circulation. I pushed back from my desk, leaned on the chair's rear legs, and whistled a bar of Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. Wolfe looked up from his copy of the Times Book Review, just long enough to scowl at the acoustics. Archie, if you must produce air vibrations, direct them toward comprehension. This one's scented with money and melodrama, I said. A lady poet, Marjorie Vale, wants discretion. My guess? Somebody's threatening to turn her rhymes into headlines. He grunted, that low cello note that meant he was listening despite pretending not to. The hour approaches 1. Mr. Goodwin, no woman of taste interrupts a man's lunch to complain of adjectives. Unless the adjectives spell blackmail, I countered, and her letterhead says Poets' Pavilion. You know that place. Champagne, couplets, and unpaid printers. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. A den of versifiers is not a professional habitat. Poetry corrupts syntax and solvent minds alike. Yeah, but their patrons write checks that don't bounce until Tuesday. You like checks? I waved the invitation like bait. Think of it as a philological rescue. You get to defend the English language from misuse and pick up $5,000 in the process. He folded the review shut, a sound like judgment. Your humor is as crude as your arithmetic. Yet, $5,000, you say? I say she'll offer 3 and you'll demand 10. You'll meet at 5. Fritz appeared at the office doorway, immaculate as a choir boy, announcing lunch with the dignity of a court herald. Sauerbraten, red cabbage, and a reminder that civilization still existed north of 34th Street. Wolfe pushed himself upright with the precision of a man negotiating peace with gravity. Very well. Inform Mrs. Vale that I shall condescend to hear her, after lunch. No sooner. Right, I said. He won't move for the United Nations, but he'll take a meeting if the roast is digested. At 3:30, the drizzle had graduated to rain, and our doorbell sounded the way opportunity usually does, nervous. I opened it to find Marjorie Vale herself, wrapped in a black raincoat that made her hair, the colour of old gold coins, look like it was struck for the purpose. Her perfume came first, then her eyes, grey-green, tired, expensive. She clutched a slim portfolio like a shield. "I'm Mrs. Vale," she said. "Mr. Wolfe is expecting me." "Yes, ma'am. He's expecting you the way a cat expects a thunderstorm, but come right in." She managed a ghost of a smile as I took her coat and led her to Wolfe's office. The room smelled of beer chill and orchid fertilizer, the house blend. Wolfe was at his desk, the globe lamp lighting him like an oversized Buddha carved from irritability. "Mrs. Vale," he said, rising half an inch out of respect or reflux. "Be seated. Mr. Goodwin may take notes." She sat, crossing her legs with the elegance of a woman who had practiced it in mirrors. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm being blackmailed." "That word," he said, "is like love, often misapplied. Proceed." She drew a breath. "My husband left behind several manuscripts, love poems, supposedly addressed to another woman. They are forgeries, yet someone claims to possess the originals and threatens to sell them to the tabloids unless I pay $10,000. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Do you possess copies of these manuscripts?" "No, only one page was sent as proof." She opened the portfolio and slid a single sheet across the desk. The paper smelled faintly of ink and fear. I examined it. Fine linen stock, typed in an imitation of Vale's flamboyant style. But the postmark on the envelope caught my eye. Poets Pavilion Press, 8 p.m., Tuesday. The Pavilion's private press. Interesting. The blackmailer wasn't just literate, but employed. "Did your husband ever correspond with anyone at the Pavilion?" I asked. "Everyone at the Pavilion," she said dryly. "They published his work and lived off his advances. Most of them still do." Wolfe tapped the sheet. "This poem, forged or genuine, demonstrates competence. The forger has literary training." She nodded miserably. "That's what terrifies me. The Pavilion people would know his style." I asked, "Any idea who might be behind the squeeze?" Her hand trembled as she adjusted her gloves. "Grant Lytton, perhaps, the editor. Or Victor Halloway, the critic. He hated Adrian but envies him still. Or—" she hesitated. "My brother-in-law, Stephen. He handles the estate. He insists on suppressing everything, even legitimate work. He says he's protecting Adrian's name." "Protecting it from profit," I said. "That's noble." Her eyes flashed. "He's protecting his own control. If these forgeries appear, I'll be ruined socially. I can't pay them." Wolfe sighed. "Madam, I detest extortion and poetry equally, but extortion pays better. The fee will be $5,000 in advance." Her lips parted in protest, then shut again. She opened her purse, produced a checkbook, and wrote with steady fingers. The signature looped like a flourish on a tragic sonnet. Wolfe accepted it with a nod, sliding it into a drawer as though tucking in a child. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "secure a photostat of this page and envelope. Then return the originals to Mrs. Vale. You will also obtain a specimen of her husband's authentic handwriting for comparison." "Sure," I said. "Anything else? Shall I pick up a rhyming dictionary and some smelling salts?" "Phooey," he said mildly. "You supply the melodrama, I supply the method." She gave a thin smile. "You two have worked together long?" "Like measles and quarantine," I said. "Now, Mrs. Vale, one more thing, this missing earring of yours. Did you misplace it before or after you left the Pavilion last night?" Her hand flew to her ear. "How did you—" "Oh." She looked down. "Yes, I lost it there. A sapphire drop. Sentimental value." "Maybe it'll turn up," I said, "unless the blackmailer pawned it to pay postage." She gave a small, grateful laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Wolfe pressed the bell cord, summoning Fritz, who entered with the serenity of Switzerland. "Beer," Wolfe instructed. "For me. Ginger ale for Mr. Goodwin. Mrs. Vale?" "No, thank you." The clink of glass punctuated her unease. Wolfe sipped, then fixed her with that heavy-lidded stare that could ferment truth faster than yeast. "Mrs. Vale, if you have withheld any fact, withdraw now or lose my services. I have neither patience nor waistline for deceit." She shook her head quickly. "I've told you everything." He inclined his head. "Then we are engaged. Mr. Goodwin will conduct inquiries this evening. You will remain silent to all parties, including the police. That is essential." She rose, relief and fear in the same motion. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe, I can't tell you." "Indeed not," he said. "Good day." I escorted her to the door, watching her umbrella vanish into the grey rain. When I returned, Wolfe was studying the cheque as if it might scan for subtext. "She's scared stiff," I said, "and somebody's making her rhyme in couplets with panic." "Her fear is genuine," he admitted. "Whether her innocence is, remains to be proved. The postmark from the Pavilion's press. Observe the time discrepancy between the letter's contents and its dispatch. 2 hours. Why?" "Printer's overtime?" He ignored that. "Someone at the Pavilion used its machinery for private ends. We must identify who had access." I nodded. "That place is a menagerie of egos. They hold salons every Thursday. I can drop by and ask literary questions until someone quotes Keats at me." "Do so," he said. "But refrain from being quoted yourself. Poets often interpret levity as criticism." "That's all right. I interpret poets as suspects." He allowed himself a rumble that might have been a laugh in a smaller man. "You are incorrigible." "Sure, that's what keeps me employed." I stood, pocketing my notebook. "Anything else before I go commune with the muses?" "Yes, take an umbrella. And Archie, be wary of admiration, it clouds judgment." That's philosophy, not procedure. It is survival, he said, reaching for another glass of beer. The conversation was over. When Wolfe drinks, Manhattan could burn and he'd only object to the draft. I headed for my coat, jotting in my memo pad. Client, Marjorie Vale. Subject, blackmail via forged poems. Pavilion connection probable. Missing earring, blue stone, postmark clue. The rain on the stoop had strengthened, washing the city down to its steel bones. I flipped my collar, thinking about the pavilion, where words were currency and someone was paying in blood. Behind me, I heard the faint chime of the elevator carrying Wolfe upward to his orchids, that daily communion between genius and humidity. He'd spend the next 2 hours contemplating begonias. I'd spend them trying to decide whether Marjorie Vale's perfume smelled more like danger or opportunity. Either way, it was going to be a long night in verse. The rain had the kind of persistence that makes cab drivers quote poetry, which was appropriate since I was heading for a house full of poets who probably couldn't afford cabs. By 8:30, I'd steered the Heron Coupe down Beekman Place, a quiet street that pretends money doesn't talk, just murmurs in cultured tones. The address, the Poets' Pavilion, looked like a townhouse that had married above its station. Georgian bones, modern nerves, and more light pouring from its windows than the city power grid had authorized. A liveried doorman opened the door as if he were admitting me to immortality. Inside, the air shimmered with gin, ego, and expensive despair. I've seen speakeasies with less chatter. The foyer's marble floor led into a salon dressed in velvet drapes and cigarette smoke. A jazz trio murmured near the fireplace, making background music for ambition. Marjorie Vale spotted me first. She wore dark blue that made her hair gleam like an apology waiting to be accepted. Her eyes flicked toward a circle of guests as if she were counting threats. "Mr. Goodwin," she breathed. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure." "Wolfe never sends flowers," I told her. "Just me." She tried for a smile, but it came out uneven. "You'll meet everyone, I suppose." "Sure, that's why I'm here, to meet everyone and offend at least one." She drifted off to play hostess, leaving me surrounded by literary fauna. Closest was Victor Halloway, the critic, tall and hollow-cheeked, with a voice that could curdle milk. He held his martini like a pen poised to correct the glass. "You're not from the Pavilion," he said, sniffing. "No," I told him. "I'm from a rival establishment, the Police Cultural Division." He blinked. "Really?" "Relax. I'm joking. Private detective. I just came to see whether art's still alive." "Barely," he said. "It keeps writing its own obituary." Then, lowering his voice, "They say Marjorie's resurrecting Adrian's work. Scandalous timing." "Timing's everything," I said, "even in resurrection." Across the room, Lila Dane, widow of a publishing empire, held court on a chaise like Cleopatra after a hostile takeover. Her diamonds could have funded 3 small magazines. Grant Litton, the editor, hovered beside her, eager to please, the way a collie hovers near the dinner table. And in the corner, Stephen Vale, the brother-in-law, sat alone with a glass of water and the expression of a man proofreading eternity. I made a slow circuit, sampling conversation and hors d'oeuvres in equal measure. Writers argued about whether rhyme was fascist or merely bourgeois. A woman in green said something about the lost manuscript, and Marjorie stiffened so slightly you'd miss it if you weren't paid to notice such things. The phrase hung in the air, soft and poisonous. I wandered toward the back hallway under the pretense of seeking the men's room. What I found was a small printing press tucked behind frosted glass doors, a private workshop smelling of ink, metal, and deadlines missed. The plates on the rack glittered with reverse text. I stepped closer, careful not to leave fingerprints. Wolfe's lectures on contamination still echoed in my skull. On the proof table lay a galley sheet signed S.V., Stephen Vale, and dated 2 months after Adrian Vale had cashed his last royalty check in the hereafter. That alone was worth a memo. Something glistened on the press lever, a dark smudge of ink, thumb-shaped. I took out my handkerchief, dabbed the edge for a photostat later. Not evidence, just insurance. "Lost, Mr. Goodwin?" The voice behind me could have sharpened knives. Lila Dane stood in the doorway, cigarette poised like a scepter. "Only geographically," I said. "This isn't the powder room, is it?" "It's the Pavilion's heart," she said. "Our private press. Authorized personnel only." "I'm authorized for curiosity. Comes with the job." She smiled thinly. And what job is that? Let's call it literary salvage. I brushed past her, noting the faint trace of printer's ink on her glove. Black, not rouge. Red herring maybe, but it flapped nicely. Back in the salon, the crowd had thickened. Someone was reciting verse about despair, which seemed redundant in that company. I found Stephen Vale still in his corner, staring into his water like he expected it to rhyme. "Mr. Vale," I said, "I'm Archie Goodwin. I believe you're managing your late brother's estate." His gaze lifted slowly. "If one can manage ashes, yes. My brother's reputation requires guardianship." "Sounds exhausting. How's business?" "Dead," he said without irony. "As it should be." "You object to the resurrection projects around here?" "I object to parasites feeding on the corpse of art." "Then maybe you should switch to prose," I suggested. He didn't smile. Marjorie called a toast then, glass trembling just enough to catch the light. "To Adrian Vale," she said. "May his words never fade." The room echoed, "Hear, hear," though most of them probably hoped the words would fade, right after the royalties. When the applause died, I stepped into the hall and called Wolfe from the payphone near the coat room. The connection crackled. His voice came through like distant thunder. "Yes, Archie?" "I'm at the Pavilion, surrounded by adjectives and people who misuse them. 1 dead poet, 4 live suspects, and a printing press in the basement turning out forgeries like flapjacks." "Are you drunk?" "Only on syntax," he grunted. "You're not at a cotillion, Mr. Goodwin. Retrieve facts, not canapes." "I'm multitasking. The canapes are informative. One of them just told me there's a lost manuscript making the rounds." "That phrase is a weed," he said. "Pluck it by its root." "Who repeated it?" "Hard to say. Everyone. This crowd gossips faster than linotype. You want me to grill someone or keep playing fly on the inkpot?" "Proceed as judgment dictates. But remember, a poet's widow is still a widow. Handle her delicately." "Sure. I'll wear gloves, uninked ones." He hung up, proving once again that verbosity was something he allowed only himself. When I turned back toward the salon, Victor Halloway intercepted me with a fresh drink. "You're Mrs. Vale's detective, aren't you? She told me someone was pestering her." "I prefer consultant," I said. "Pestering's extra." He smirked. "Be careful. This crowd eats detectives for breakfast." "Then it's a good thing Wolfe doesn't serve breakfast." A laugh rippled behind us. Grant Lytton, cheeks flushed from the open bar. "Halloway's just bitter because nobody quotes his reviews." "Better unquoted than unread," Halloway shot back. Their mutual dislike glowed like a neon sign. I filed it away with the galley proof. As the evening sagged toward midnight, the glamour thinned. Marjorie had retreated to a sofa, pale and distant. Lila Dane circulated with feline precision, whispering to Lytton. Stephen Vale vanished, claiming air, which on a night like that meant suffocation. I slipped once more toward the press room. The inky fingerprint was still there, but fresh smears dotted the handle, as if someone had tried to wipe it clean and thought better halfway through. I heard footsteps and ducked behind the proof table. Through the crack of the door I saw Grant Lytton enter, muttering to himself, flipping through pages. He tucked something into his jacket, thin, paper-sized, then left. When I stepped out, 1 stack of galley proofs was missing. It could have been coincidence. It could also have been the kind of coincidence that ends up in Kramer's report under evidence withheld by Goodwin, which is why I memorized what I saw instead of pocketing anything. By 1 o'clock the party was a skeleton of itself. The last taxi honked outside, scattering the poets to their separate egos. Marjorie thanked me in a voice that trembled between relief and fear. "Did you find anything?" "Only the usual. Too many words and not enough honesty." "Will Mr. Wolfe take my case seriously?" she asked. "He's already quoting you. That's practically affection." Her lips curved faintly. "Then there's hope." "Hope's fine," I said, "so long as it doesn't demand an advance." I left her there under the chandelier, surrounded by the debris of art, empty glasses, cigarette butts, and phrases that had died trying to mean something. Outside, the street was slick and silent except for the rain and my thoughts. I jotted notes in my pad under a street lamp. Pavilion. Ink press active. Proof signed SV postmortem date. Fingerprint unknown. Lytton removes proof. Phrase, lost manuscript, common currency. Then I drove back toward 35th Street. When I entered the brownstone at 2:30, the lights in Wolfe's office were still on. That meant he'd sacrificed an hour of sleep to think, which for him ranked just below heresy. He looked up from his desk, eyes half closed. Report. I handed him the notes. They drink words and bleed ink, and somebody's printing something they shouldn't. He read the shorthand silently, then set it down. An inky fingerprint. Excellent. If it belongs to Mrs. Vale, it proves nothing. If not, everything. Will require a comparison. Already planned, I said. I can charm a fingerprint out of half those guests by tomorrow. Phooey. Charm them into facts, not fingerprints. Can I use both? He allowed the faintest sigh. Mr. Goodwin, your levity is a constitutional defect, but sometimes serviceable. You will proceed after lunch. Now bed. Right. The poetic life has worn me out. As I reached the door, he added, Archie, take care. The literati often substitute cruelty for intellect. I noticed. Don't worry, I can rhyme mugging with slugging if necessary. That got the closest thing to a smile he ever risks at midnight. I shut the door quietly, leaving him with his orchids of the mind and his beer of consolation. Tomorrow we'd see what the Pavilion was really printing, art, blackmail, or both. And if someone there was writing murder in blank verse, they'd soon find out Wolfe preferred prose justice. 2 evenings later, back at the Poets' Pavilion for another Thursday salon, the scream began like a soprano warming up and ended like a subway break. For one long second, the chatter in the Poets' Pavilion froze, then glasses shattered, chairs scraped, and everyone in the room remembered they had hearts. I was halfway to the marble stairway before the echo died. Marjorie Vale lay sprawled halfway down the steps, her body twisted at an angle nobody rehearses. The sheaf of papers she'd been holding fanned around her like white feathers from a punctured pillow. Her eyes were open, looking at nothing a living person could see. The soft music from the trio stopped mid-note. "Call a doctor," someone yelled, as if that ever helped in real life. I knelt beside her, checking for a pulse more out of habit than hope. There wasn't one. Her neck had gone wrong somewhere around the second vertebra. On the marble beside her hand lay a torn scrap of paper with a penciled line. Not mine. Ask Stephen. I pocketed it for safekeeping, already planning the photostat. Then I straightened up and looked at the audience. About 20 people, most in shock, 1 or 2 looking theatrically distraught for practice. The doorman, a uniformed slab named Harris, came running in, face pale as parchment. "Nobody's come or gone for an hour, sir," he stammered. "Good," I said. "Then we've got ourselves a captive audience." The whisper spread like wildfire through dry grass. Murder. Somebody knocked over a glass of gin. It sounded like punctuation. I went to the nearest phone, ignoring the way Halloway's voice cracked behind me. "She fell. It was an accident," and dialed the brownstone. Wolfe answered on the second ring, which meant Fritz had fetched him away from digestion, a federal offence in that household. "Yes, Archie?" "She's dead," I said. "Marjorie Vale, bottom of the stairs, neck broken, papers scattered. Everyone claims innocence and sobriety, which I doubt in both cases." There was a silence long enough for a fat man to think, then, "Do not touch the body." I was aiming for gallant, not gruesome. Gallantry is wasted on corpses. Remain until Inspector Kramer arrives. You will cooperate within the boundaries of prudence. Meaning keep my mouth half open and my hands in my pockets. Precisely. The line clicked dead. I turned back. The Pavilion's manager, a pencil-thin man in tails, hovered near the stairs like he'd just been appointed guardian angel. "We should move her," he whispered. "Don't," I said, "unless you want your fingerprints compared to everyone's nightmares." He swallowed. Around us the guests muttered. Lila Dane clung to a cigarette, ash trembling. Grant Lytton looked green, which clashed with his tie. And Stephen Vale, Marjorie's brother-in-law, stood motionless at the landing, his face blank, eyes fixed on the paper scattered near her hand. When the police sirens wailed outside, the crowd parted like a weak alibi. 2 uniforms entered first, followed by Inspector Kramer, coat collar up, cigar clamped like a weapon. Rain glistened on his hat brim. He took one look at me and groaned. "Goodwin, I should have guessed." "Happy coincidence," I said. "We were clients. Her retainer precedes her decease." "That's cute. Where's the body?" I pointed. He went over, squatted, muttered something to the medical examiner who'd followed him, then rose with a grunt. "Neck broken clean. Could be a fall, could be a shove." His eyes narrowed. "You saw it happen?" I heard it, came running. She was already past the point of conversation. He puffed smoke. Convenient. You working this solo, or does Wolfe plan to solve it between meals? Between meals, I said, but only if you share evidence generously. Phooey, he muttered, stealing Wolfe's trademark and mangling it. Nobody leaves. Stebbins! The bulldog sergeant lumbered in from the hall, rain dripping off his chin. Yeah, Inspector? Get names, statements, addresses, lock the doors. I want that doorman glued to his post. Stebbins nodded, barking orders like a tugboat captain. I leaned against the banister, lighting a cigarette I didn't want, because watching smart people panic always dries the throat. Lila Dane approached, voice trembling just enough. Inspector, surely you don't think... I think everybody in this room could have done it, he said. Including you. Her lipstick quivered. I was beside Victor when it happened, Kramer grunted. So he says. I'll verify. He turned to me. You said she was your client. For what? Blackmail over her late husband's manuscripts. His eyebrows went up. Poems? Allegedly. I never said crime couldn't rhyme. He exhaled cigar smoke in my direction. Don't get smart. You got anything concrete? Just this. I showed him the torn scrap. Not mine. Ask Stephen. Kramer read it, grunted again. Stephen Vale, that you? The brother-in-law looked up slowly. Yes, but I've no idea what she meant. That's for me to decide, Kramer said. Stay handy. While Stebbins took statements, I stepped aside and called the brownstone again, low voice under the hubbub. They're locking us in, boss. Kramer's got his claws out. Good, Wolfe said. Observe carefully. Do not interfere. That's your hobby, not mine. Archie. His tone deepened, the one that brooked no argument. You are my agent, not a gladiator. Let the police thrash. Fine, but if Kramer starts quoting verse, I'm jumping out a window. Spare the building, he said, and hung up. I went back to the scene. The medical examiner was dictating details. No defensive bruising, likely surprised, time of death about 10 minutes before we arrived. Kramer studied the stair rail. Could she have tripped? The examiner shrugged. Possible, but the brake's too clean. Looks like a twist, not a tumble. That tightened the air. Eyes darted, voices lowered. I caught Grant Litton mopping his brow. She was going to expose something, he murmured to no one in particular. What's that? I asked. He jumped. Nothing. Just, she was upset earlier. Said someone was printing new poems in Adrian's style. Forged verses? He nodded nervously. She called it desecration. I filed it away. Red herring sometimes led to bigger fish. Kramer finished barking orders, then jerked his head at me. All right, Goodwin. Out in the hall. We stepped aside from the crowd. He lowered his voice. Wolfe's mixed in this up to his eyebrows again, huh? Only to the bank balance. She hired us to find her blackmailer. Looks like he beat you to it. Maybe, I said. Or maybe somebody didn't like her housekeeping in the family closet. He chewed the cigar, frowning. That brother-in-law smells off, cold as a fish. Maybe grief freezes fast. Maybe, he admitted, but he'll thaw under questioning. He jabbed a thumb toward the body. You sure Wolfe didn't send you here to stir trouble? Wolfe never stirs, I said. He lets me do the whisking. Kramer's mouth twitched, the closest thing he owned to humour. Yeah, well, tell him not to whisk too hard. The DA's watching this one. When the photographers finished, they zipped Marjorie Vale into a canvas cocoon and carried her out. The sound of the zipper hit the room like final punctuation. Lila Dane sobbed delicately into her gloves. Stephen Vale stood rigid, unreadable. Kramer began herding witnesses for transport downtown. I slipped one last look at the staircase. On the second step, half hidden by shadow, was a faint streak of black. Ink, maybe. I crouched, pretending to tie my shoe, and noted it mentally. If Wolfe's theory about the Pavilion's private press held water, that smear might connect the literary and the lethal. By 2 a.m. the room had emptied except for cops and clean-up. Kramer was dictating to Stebbins when he turned to me. You staying? Until you kick me out. Wolfe wants first-hand detail. He grunted. Fine, but if I find you pocketing evidence, I'll personally make you write poetry in Sing Sing. I saluted. That's cruel and unusual punishment. When he finally cleared me to go, I stepped into the wet Manhattan night. The rain had eased to drizzle again, polite enough not to smear the city's conscience too badly. I drove back to West 35th with the windows cracked, letting the night air clear the stench of panic. Wolfe was still awake when I came in, A rare sight. The office glowed amber from the lamp, his massive bulk behind the desk like a seated mountain. The air smelled of beer and thought. "Well," he asked. "She's dead, neck snapped clean, message in her hand. Not mine, ask Stephen. Kramer's in full form, Stebbins collecting poetry fans by the dozen. My guess, shoved from behind, motive undecided." He nodded slowly. "And you touch nothing? Not even temptation? Good. We are detectives, not coroners." I was aiming for gallant. "Gallantry," he said, "is sentimentality dressed as chivalry." He leaned back. "Tell me about the paper scrap." I handed over the photostat copy I'd made before leaving. He examined it with his loupe, murmured, "Same stock as the forged poem. Intriguing." "So Stephen's in for a rough morning?" "Undoubtedly. Yet the words, 'not mine,' what did she repudiate? A poem, a sin, or perhaps guilt itself?" "Pick one, then," I said. "They're all fatal tonight." Fritz appeared silently at the doorway, announcing, "Beer, Herr Wolfe?" Wolfe nodded. "Yes, Mr. Goodwin." "Make mine ginger ale," I said. "I've had enough spirits for one evening." When Fritz withdrew, Wolfe gazed at me over the rim of his glass. "You performed adequately, Archie. Even your restraint deserves commendation." "Coming from you, that's affection. I'll frame it." He ignored the crack. "Tomorrow you will speak with Mr. Vale. We shall see whether his brother's ghost still writes verse, or confessions. Lunch at 1, orchids till 11, so noon it is." "Precisely." He raised the glass in a small toast. I took it as permission to call it a night. As I climbed the stairs toward my room, I heard him mutter to himself, quoting Latin about vanity and art. Somewhere downtown, Kramer was probably writing his report, and somewhere nearer, a murderer was writing a different kind of poetry, one Wolfe intended to edit with extreme prejudice. By 10 that night, the city had switched to its night face, neon lipstick, bad manners, and more lies than daylight could stomach. I'd just finished steering Grant Litton, editor extraordinaire, through our brownstone door, where Fritz took one look and decided the visitor wasn't worth dusting off a glass for. Wolfe sat behind his desk, monumental and motionless, like an idea that didn't care what you thought of it. The air smelled of orchids from the rooms above, and sauerbraten ghosts from dinner. It was a perfect hour for a confession or indigestion. Litton paused inside the office, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, nervous energy humming through every syllable, "I don't see why—" "You will," Wolfe said. "Sit down." I guided him toward the red leather chair and took my usual place, notebook ready. Wolfe folded his hands. "Your presence at the Poets' Pavilion during Mrs. Marjorie Vale's death and your subsequent involvement with her late husband's work make conversation inevitable. Be explicit. Begin with your occupation." "I'm an editor," Litton said stiffly. "I oversee publications for the Pavilion." "A euphemism," Wolfe murmured. "You market art as product. At what time did you last see Mrs. Vale alive?" "I told the police around 10. I was in the basement press room checking proofs. The run finished just before the accident." "Your verbs falter under pressure," Wolfe said. "You were in the press room, or you claim to have been." He frowned. "I was there, damn it. We'd been running a private job, special edition for a client." "Define special." Litton hesitated. "A limited printing of Adrian Vale's final poems. Recently discovered work. The client wanted anonymity." "That particular epidemic again," Wolfe said, dry as chalk. "Anonymity infects guilty men first. Who brokered the transaction?" He rubbed his temple. "Lila Dane. She handled the financing. Said a collector wanted to honor Vale's memory." "By counterfeiting it," Wolfe said. Litton stiffened. "I didn't know they were fake." "Mrs. Vale thought otherwise," Wolfe said. "She threatened exposure. That would jeopardize your special job, yes?" "It would have caused trouble," Litton admitted. "But she wasn't rational." "Few widows are when commerce rifles their husband's coffin." Wolfe leaned forward, gaze fixed on the dark stains smudged on Litton's cuff. "Printer's ink?" "From the press," Litton said quickly. "Fresh," Wolfe noted. "I leaned on the form while checking proofs." I said, "We're collecting ink, not evidence, but this batch looks mixed today." He snapped. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Only that the run ended before 10, I said, "and that stain's still wet." Litton swallowed. "I stayed longer, making notes. The foreman will confirm." Names, Wolfe ordered. He rattled them off. Foreman Hughes, operators Morley and Finch, a messenger boy named Eddie. I jotted them down. Very good, Wolfe said. Now, did you quarrel with Mrs. Vale earlier? He hesitated. Yes. She came to the Pavilion that evening, furious. Said we were desecrating Adrian's name. I told her the project would secure his reputation. She called it forgery. Then she stormed off. I swear that's the last I saw her. And within an hour she was dead, Wolfe said. You must admit the timing has rhythm. Lytton exhaled. You think I killed her over a book deal? Over profit, pride, and fear, Wolfe corrected. Those have killed more than pistols. He sagged. You can't possibly. The phone on my desk rang at 10:52. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's office, Goodwin. Kramer's gravel voice came through. Archie, put him on. I passed it over. Wolfe took the receiver between two fingers as if it was something the cat had dragged in. Yes, Inspector? Wolfe, Kramer said. Word is you dragged Grant Lytton out of my case file. I told you to keep clear. My radius seldom exceeds the rug, Wolfe said. Mr. Lytton is conversing voluntarily. Voluntarily my elbow, Kramer barked. You interfere again, I'll get a material witness warrant, and if you've touched evidence— I do not touch, Inspector, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin may, rarely, I observe. Observe this, Kramer snapped. When you're done observing, I want him back in my hands. Understand? Perfectly, Wolfe said. Good evening. He hung up and exhaled through his nose. That man's sense of jurisdiction is as wide as his vocabulary is narrow. I said, at least he doesn't bill by the adverb. Wolfe ignored me. Mr. Lytton, the police will assume you killed Mrs. Vale unless you produce something sturdier than sentiment. I suggest coherence. Lytton slumped. You want a timeline? Fine, I'll give you one. I rolled a fresh sheet into the typewriter. Fire away. He began. At 3, I had a meeting with the Pavilion board. At 5, drinks with Victor Halloway. At 7, back to the Pavilion to check the press room. Mrs. Vale found me there around 9:15. We argued. She left. I stayed below, overseeing the final batch until 10:30. Then the scream. I ran upstairs. I typed while Wolfe listened, still as marble. You omitted dinner, Wolfe said. I skipped it. Convenient, Wolfe murmured. When did you last wash that shirt? Lytton blinked. This morning. Then you have carried the same ink since breakfast. He flushed. You're twisting it. I prefer accuracy, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin, photograph that cuff before he leaves. I reached for the camera in the cabinet. Lytton made a strangled protest. Is that necessary? It is practical, Wolfe said. Sit still. The bulb flashed, freezing his panic in silver halide. I filed the plate for later. Now, Wolfe said, tell me about the patrons' funds. Who deposited them? Lila handled everything. The money came through a trust. Convenient opacity again. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. You see, Mr. Lytton, the pattern of concealment is too symmetrical to be coincidence. The widow threatens to shout, and the Pavilion's benefactor risks embarrassment. You, their intermediary, become expendable or useful. I'm being framed, he demanded. Possibly, Wolfe said, but whether you are the frame or the picture remains to be seen. That shut him up. I finished typing his statement, tore out the sheet, and had him sign. He scrawled his name like a man autographing regret. You may go, Wolfe said finally. Inspector Kramer awaits your custody. Lytton rose, face grey. If you find who did this, tell him I'm not your villain. Not yet, Wolfe said. I walked him to the hall, handed him his hat. Advice, I said. Keep that cuff. Kramer likes souvenirs. He grimaced and left. Back inside, Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, fingers steepled. Well, I asked. He lies in fragments, not in whole, Wolfe said. He knows the forgery, but not the killer. Still, ink is honest, it stains impartially. That stain was made hours after his press run. Someone wished to prove he'd been there when he had not. Meaning somebody gave him a decorative cuff, I said. Meaning, Wolfe said, someone dabbed him as alibi. Lovely, I said. Tomorrow I'll hunt our ink fairy. Where do I start? With Mrs. Dane, Wolfe said. Inquire about the client. Tell her I require full disclosure, or my vocabulary will appear in her obituary. That'll scare her, I said. Editors hate obituaries with bad grammar. He reached for the bell cord. Fritz appeared silently, the domestic equivalent of a comma. "Beer," Wolfe said. "A single glass. Mr. Goodwin, ginger ale." As Fritz withdrew, Wolfe looked up at me. "Archie, our task is to separate artistry from commerce. Both, left unchecked, reek." I said, "And if they mix?" "Then," he said, "one murders the other. Always." I filed Litton's signed statement in the safe, locked it, and turned back. Wolfe sat immobile, listening to the distant clink of Fritz preparing his glass. The office was warm and golden, a good colour for secrets. "Well," I said, "if ink endures and blood fades, tomorrow's going to be messy." He gave a small grunt that might have been agreement or indigestion. Either way, the case had printed a new page, and Wolfe intended to edit it with his usual brutality. "I've always said there are two kinds of apartments in uptown Manhattan, the ones that smell like money, trying to forget its sins, and the ones that smell like education, doing the same thing." Stephen Vale's was the latter. A Park Avenue corner flat with a brass knocker shaped like Minerva, it announced its intellect before the door even opened. When it did, the air hit me like a mix of pipe smoke, whiskey, and a dead poet's ghost. Vale himself looked like a man who had spent a lifetime disagreeing with Plato and winning on points. Tall, spare, wrapped in a dressing gown that had seen better Greek tragedies, he stood among busts of Socrates and Homer like the last curator at a museum no one funded anymore. His eyes, pale and dry, didn't blink much. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, voice cool as library marble. I was expecting someone shorter. "Yeah," I said. "People keep saying that until I bill them." I showed my credentials and got the faintest twitch of a smile. He led me through a living room cluttered with manuscripts, ledgers, and an ashtray large enough to stage a duel in. The fireplace held a dying ember that looked as though it regretted burning for such company. "I assume this is about my brother's unfortunate widow," he said, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey without asking. "Or the circus she died in." "You assume right," I said, taking the chair opposite him. "You knew she was afraid someone was selling forged poems under your brother's name." He gave a dry chuckle. "Afraid? Marjorie was addicted to fear. It gave her importance." "That's a nice epitaph," I said. "Did you write it yourself?" "I could hardly do worse than Adrian," he said, with the kind of contempt that could cut glass. His poetry was adolescent narcissism in metre. I intended to suppress all of it. "Out of taste or jealousy?" He raised an eyebrow. "Out of mercy. For literature." That was the moment I realized Stephen Vale didn't just dislike poetry. He despised the very notion of someone being applauded for feelings he couldn't afford to show. The room suited him. Books were stacked by subject, not affection. Every shelf looked like an argument neatly concluded. "So," I said, "you wanted the work buried, but the Pavilion didn't." "Ah, the Pavilion." He downed his drink. "A temple built by sinners for saints they can sell. Lila Dane called me 6 weeks ago with her little proposition, published the lost poems in a limited edition, said the public was hungry for tragedy." "She'd know," I said. "She's been married to it twice." He ignored that. I told her no, the works are juvenilia, embarrassing imitations of Keats and Confusion, but she insisted, claimed collectors would pay thousands. "And someone did," I said. "Your ledger says so." That got his attention. His gaze flicked to the desk, where a black-bound ledger sat open beside a stack of invoices. "You've been snooping?" "Let's call it reading comprehension," I said. "That entry, private collection, Pavilion transfer, $500, dated 2 nights before Marjorie's death. Care to annotate?" His jaw tightened. "Routine payment. The Pavilion handles reproduction rights. My accountant insists on precise notation." "Sure," I said. "But this one's different. No invoice number, no date received, just initials. LD. That's Lila Dane, right?" For a second, his expression flickered, just a blink of nerves under the surface, but it was enough to tell me he wasn't surprised by the question, only annoyed to hear it out loud. "She arranged the trust," he said. "For a collector who prefers anonymity. I don't concern myself with printing schedules." "Then you won't mind if I ask what's in that private collection?" He stared at the ledger, then at me. "Old proofs. Type plates, paperwork. Nothing relevant." "Plates?" I asked. He caught himself too late. "Printing plates. Of the authentic poems, of course." "Of course," I said. "And I'm the king of Siam." You keep them here? Goodwin, he said sharply. My brother was a fool worshipped by fools. His widow was one of them. But I didn't kill her, and I didn't forge his work. If someone's profiting, it's Lila Dane. She's always had a fondness for posthumous money. That's a cute phrase, I said. You might try writing verse yourself. He smiled thinly. Don't insult me. The whiskey bottle glinted between us like an unspoken truce. I let the silence stretch, long enough for him to think he'd regained ground. Then I said, You mind if I take a peek at that receipt? Purely for photostat purposes. He shrugged. If it amuses you. I took it carefully. The paper was Pavilion stationery, embossed with their crest, a quill wrapped in laurel, dated the night before Marjorie's murder, the signature in fountain ink, LD. The smell of printer's oil clung faintly to it, fresher than it should have been. Thanks, Pete, I said, sliding it into my folder. I'll bring it back before the ink dries. See that you do, he said. I value my records. I stood, glancing at the wall of Greek busts staring down at me. You know, they say envy's the sincerest form of criticism. He frowned. You think I envied Adrian? Maybe not his poems, but he could make people listen. That's a dangerous talent. He didn't answer. The silence in that apartment could have passed for dignity if not for the smell of whiskey and dust. I left him there, among his dead philosophers and living ghosts. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the city still gleamed like it had been freshly oiled. I drove straight back to West 35th Street, where the brownstone was lit like a civilized lighthouse. Inside, Wolfe was at his desk with a cigar stub the size of a philosophy book. The clock said midnight, which meant I was late enough to annoy him, but early enough to survive it. You're back, he said without looking up. And intact, apparently. Mostly, I said, tossing my hat on the rack. Stephen Vale says he's allergic to poetry and innocent of murder. He also keeps receipts like a monk keeps vows. Sit, he said. Report. I gave him the rundown, the ledger, the payment-marked private collection, the receipt from Lila Dane, the slip about the plates. He listened with his eyes closed, which is how he hears best. When I finished, he opened them. Photographic plates, he repeated. You're certain? As certain as a man who's been lied to politely, I said. He slipped when I asked. Wolfe grunted. Phooey. The forgeries were printed from such plates. The private collection is not manuscripts. It is machinery. Then Vale's not just a critic, he's a warehouse. Possibly unwitting, Wolfe said. Or not. He tapped the desk bell, and Fritz appeared like a well-timed comma. Beer, Wolfe said, chilled, and a small one for Mr. Goodwin. I said, Make mine bourbon. It's the philosopher's drink tonight. Wolfe's brow twitched. You philosophize over bourbon. I prefer variety. Sure, I said. You philosophize over beer. I prefer to stay awake. He ignored that. You will verify that receipt with the Pavilion's records tomorrow. If Lila Dane arranged it, she is either financier or forger. Either way, culpable. Got it, I said. And Vale? Vale is a man who mistakes taste for virtue. Such men often become accomplices to crime, not perpetrators. Still, he may yet prove useful. Envy, Archie, is the yeast in human dough. It ferments everything it touches. That's deep, I said. You sure you don't want that bourbon after all? He gave me one of his side glances, the kind that feels like it weighs your IQ. No, beer suffices. Fritz returned with the tray. Wolfe raised his glass solemnly. To comprehension, he said. I clinked mine. To ulcers. He took a long sip, leaned back and closed his eyes. The orchids upstairs would be getting their evening attention soon, which meant I was dismissed. I gathered my notes but paused at the door. Boss, I said, you ever notice how everyone in this case wants to protect something? Reputation, art, money, and they all end up dirty anyway. Of course, Wolfe said without opening his eyes. Clean hands are an impediment to work. I grinned. Then I'll keep mine in my pockets. Do, he said. Upstairs, the faint hum of the elevator signalled his next ritual. Orchids, quiet, and thought. I headed for the kitchen, thinking about Stephen Vale and his philosopher's tomb of a flat. Somewhere among those ledgers and plates was the line between envy and guilt, and tomorrow I intended to underline it in red ink. By 11 the next morning, the brownstone was performing its usual symphony of quiet efficiency. Fritz was in the kitchen orchestrating a sauce that could make diplomats weep. Wolfe was upstairs among the orchids, conducting his 10:00 a.m. rites like a pope in exile, and I was typing up notes that would one day make great bedtime reading for a jury. The city outside hummed with its weekday racket, and I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Saul Pantzer, flat cap, dry expression, and a manila envelope thick enough to make me forget the weather. Saul never grinned. His idea of enthusiasm was a fractional lift of one eyebrow. He said, "Got something for the fat man." "Step right into the temple of logic," I told him. "He's watering orchids, but I'll rattle the heavens." Saul followed me inside and sat down without being asked. I went to the office bell cord and gave it a firm tug. From above came the faint hum of machinery, then silence. 5 minutes later, the elevator groaned, descended, and released Wolfe in all his post-botanical grandeur. "Saul," he said, as though the name itself were a commendation. "You have news?" Saul handed over the envelope. "Watermark report and lab results on that galley-proof Archie lifted from the Pavilion press room." "Secured," I corrected. Wolfe frowns on the word lifted. Saul ignored me. The papers marked Harrow and Lang, Series 4C, imported by Dane & Sons Publishing. That batch was ordered 5 months after Adrian Vale's death. That made Wolfe's head tilt like a judge considering a guilty plea. "After," he repeated, "not before." "Right," Saul said. "I checked their purchase invoices. The Pavilion got its supply from Dane's firm. Same stock, same watermark, same cut. Someone used Dane's paper to print those lost poems." I whistled softly. "So the widow publisher's been printing posthumous love notes for fun and profit." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "Not widow publisher. Conspirator. The forgery ring is internal to the Pavilion, fed by her resources and Vale's access." He dropped into his chair like a collapsing verdict. "It fits too well." "Want me to phone Kramer?" I asked. "Not yet." Wolfe unwrapped Saul's other documents, a typed comparison sheet and a magnified photo of the watermark. His thick finger traced the faint H&L emblem. "Archie, note the pattern. These sheets were not merely printed, they were staged. Someone wished to lend authenticity by imitation, but paper betrays its own chronology." Saul nodded once. "That's the gold." Wolfe allowed himself a small exhale. "Your competence, Mr. Pantzer, continues to shame civilization. Collect your fee from Mr. Goodwin." Saul stood, pocketed his cap, and left with a nod. I followed him to the door, locked it, and came back. Wolfe was already arranging note cards on the desk like chess pieces. "So, what's the next move?" I asked. "Colloquy," he said. "I must think." Thinking for Wolfe involves silence thick enough to hear dust settling. I lit a cigarette, typed up Saul's findings, and watched him stare at the ceiling as though divine inspiration rented office space there. At 12:20, he finally spoke. "Archie, we have a forgery ring, a widow profiteer, an executor drowning in guilt, and an editor complicit by inertia. One of them panicked. That panic killed Mrs. Vale." "And we've still got one corpse too few for Kramer to choke on," I said. "Archie." He opened his eyes. "Don't tempt fate." Fate, however, was already listening. The phone rang at 12:32. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's residence. The voice on the other end was sharp and hoarse. "Goodwin, this is Cohen, Lon Cohen Gazette. You'd better tell Wolfe the Pavilion's on the front page again. Grant Litton's dead. Cyanide in his coffee." I went cold. "Where?" "In his office. Police are there now. Looks like suicide, but rumour says he was about to talk to you." "Thanks, Lon," I said. "And don't print our names yet." I hung up. Wolfe was watching me, eyes narrowed. "Another?" "Yeah," I said. "Litton, cyanide, in his office. The Pavilion's closing faster than a bad play." "2 deaths in a week," Wolfe murmured. "Sloppy." I leaned back. "We're not running a quality control department, sir." He gave a small grunt, not quite amusement. "No, we are running patients through a sieve." He reached for the phone. "Inspector Kramer." Kramer arrived 40 minutes later, looking as though he'd walked through every block of Manhattan to get there. His hat was pushed back, his cigar chewed to the consistency of optimism, and his trench coat hung from his shoulders like a flag at half-mast. He stood just inside the office, scanning the room. "All right, Wolfe. I know you didn't call to offer condolences." "I rarely condole," Wolfe said. "Please sit." Kramer didn't. He stayed by the door, cigar working like a metronome. "You were in touch with Lytton. He was supposed to see Goodwin today." I nodded. 10 o'clock. He didn't show. "Well, he's not showing anywhere now," Kramer said. "Cyanide in his cup. Empty ashtray. One slug of type metal in it. Word truth engraved." He looked at me, then Wolfe. "Mean anything to you?" Wolfe's brows lifted a fraction. "A printer's slug. A single word. Poetic." "Yeah, well, the lab boys aren't feeling poetic. They found traces of the same paper stock you've been sniffing around. Harrow and Lang, batch 4C. Want to tell me why everything dead in this case smells like ink?" I said, "We were about to call you with that very observation. Saul Panzer found the proof we secured, has the same watermark as Dane & Sons' imports." Kramer's jaw worked. "Dane again. She's been playing the press like a fiddle since this started. But I can't nail her for murder without something solid." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "You lack proof of her complicity as I do. But consider motive. Mrs. Vale threatened exposure, which endangered the Pavilion's enterprise. Mr. Lytton's death eliminates an accomplice, or witness." Kramer took the cigar out of his mouth and looked at it as if considering eating it. "You're suggesting Dane killed both?" "I suggest nothing," Wolfe said. "I observe coincidence. 2 deaths orbiting one press room." Kramer sighed. "You know, Wolfe, there are nights I dream about retiring to Vermont, buying a bait shop, and never hearing your voice again." "That would impoverish you spiritually," Wolfe said. "Yeah." He looked around the room, then rubbed his temple. "You ever get tired of being right?" "I have no such luxury." Something softened in Kramer's face. Exhaustion more than admiration. "I'd trade my badge to close this circus clean." "You will not need to," Wolfe said quietly. "But you must restrain haste. Arrest Dane too soon and she'll bury us in lawyers. Better to let her think the forgeries remain secret." Kramer nodded slowly. "All right, I'll give you rope, but if you hang yourself with it, don't expect me to cut you down." He turned to go. I said, "Inspector, try to get that typesetting slug to us. It might spell more than truth." He paused at the door. "You'll get a photocopy. And, Wolfe, try not to find another body before Friday. The commissioner's nerves are frayed." When the door closed, Wolfe exhaled deeply. "The second death complicates timing," he said. "Kramer's right," I told him. "This thing's turning into a cemetery with membership dues." He ignored me, staring at his index cards. "A printer's slug labelled truth. A forgery ring producing falsehood. Irony offends me." "Then you'll love this," I said. "Cyanide in coffee means someone wanted the editor's silence permanent, not poetic." "Pfui," he muttered. "Poets rarely kill. Publishers do." He leaned back, fingers steepled. The office fell into one of those silences that seemed to stretch time like rubber. I could almost hear the city exhaling through the open window, car horns, typewriters, and a siren that might have been mourning the latest victim. Finally, he spoke again. "Archie, tomorrow you will call on Mrs. Dane. You will not accuse her. You will inquire politely how her firm came to import Series 4C paper so coincidentally close to her client's death." "And if she faints?" I asked. "Catch her." I nodded. "You're charming when you plan entrapment. Do not jest. Each death narrows the field, but not the danger. Whoever forges verses has learned to print obituaries as well." Fritz appeared in the doorway with a silver tray. Beer for Wolfe, ginger ale for me. The clink of glass punctuated the room like the end of a paragraph. Wolfe took his glass, raised it, and murmured, "To truth." I clinked mine against it. "In limited edition." He didn't smile, but the corners of his eyes softened. Then he drank deeply, set the glass down, and said, "Archie, when I am dead, never allow them to publish my correspondence. Humanity does not deserve my prose." "Don't worry," I said. "I'll forge it myself." That earned me a full glare, the kind that would have melted less experienced detectives. I finished my ginger ale, typed a fresh memo labelled Murder 2, and slid it into the file drawer. Outside, a light rain began to fall, tapping against the office window like fingers on a typewriter. It sounded a lot like someone composing the next chapter of Trouble. If there's a proper place to interrogate a liar, Park Avenue after lunch comes close. The streets were clean, the windows were smug, and the woman I was going to see could have taught both a few tricks. Lila Dane's office perched on the 10th floor of a building with marble vanes and an elevator operator who looked like he'd been embalmed for convenience. When he slid open the gate, I stepped into a reception area that smelled like lilacs, ink, and desperation trying to pass for perfume. The walls were all gilt mirrors and modern art, paintings that looked like colour had given up hope and jumped. A secretary in a silk blouse the colour of expensive silence gave me the up and down. "Miss Dane is occupied." "So's the NYPD," I said, "but they make room for priorities. Tell her it's Archie Goodwin, Nero Wolfe's office." That worked. 3 minutes later I was ushered into a room with too much glass and too little honesty. Behind a mahogany desk sat Lila Dane, slim, perfectly composed, wearing confidence like it was Paris couture. The light hit her diamond bracelet and almost apologized. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, voice soft but slanted. "How flattering that Mr. Wolfe sent his right hand." "I'm ambidextrous," I told her, taking the chair opposite. "He prefers to avoid the indignity of traffic. You've heard about Grant Lytton." Her eyelashes didn't flicker. "Tragic. He was unstable. I warned him to rest." "Rest takes effort when you've swallowed cyanide." A faint line appeared between her brows. "How ghastly. But what does that have to do with me?" "Everything," I said. "He was your partner in poetry, unpublished poetry, forged poetry, profitable poetry." Her laugh was glass on marble. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm a publisher, not a criminal. The Pavilion handled the work. I only financed it." I let my grin wander. "That's generous. You financed the paper, the press, the forgeries, and possibly 2 funerals." "Please," she said, turning slightly toward the window. "You sound like the tabloids." "That's funny," I said. "They sound like me." The phone on her desk rang. She hesitated, then lifted the receiver. "Yes?" "Mrs. Dane." Wolfe's voice rumbled through, smooth as oak and twice as heavy. "I trust Mr. Goodwin is not discomforting you." Her hand froze. "Mr. Wolfe? How unexpected." "I dislike expectation," he said. "It impairs candour. I wish to clarify a literary point. You recall the line, 'The rose of remorse blooms in the dead man's hand'?" She blinked. "Yes, that's Adrian's." "No," Wolfe said. "That line appears in a manuscript found among Mr. Lytton's effects. It was not published nor recorded, save in your private correspondence." Silence thickened. Even the secretary outside seemed to stop typing. I watched her hand tighten on the receiver. "That's impossible," she said at last. "He must have stolen." "Pfui. Theft requires existence. The line was fabricated by your forger's press." Wolfe's tone softened, almost courteous. "You may preserve dignity or truth, Mrs. Dane. Choose swiftly." She lowered the phone slightly, breathing shallow. For the first time, her perfect posture slumped, like a mask melting under stage lights. "All right," she said quietly. "Yes, I did it. I forged Adrian's poems. The world wanted romance. I sold them his ghost." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "And Mr. Lytton?" "He handled the sales," she said. "I was desperate. Debts, lawsuits. Grant made it profitable. Then Marjorie Vale found out and threatened to expose us. He panicked, said he could control her. I didn't believe he'd kill." Her voice cracked just once, then steadied. "When he died, I thought it was over." I leaned forward. "So you admit fraud, but not murder." "I'm not a killer, Mr. Goodwin. I only borrowed a reputation." "Borrowed," I said. "You mortgaged it with interest." She shot me a look that could have sharpened knives. "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not," I said, "but you're bleeding truth all over that desk." Wolfe's voice came again, slow and final. "You stated Mr. Lytton handled all physical printing." "Yes." "Then explain the missing slug from your press, the word truth. It engraved Mr. Lytton's ashtray at his death." Her hand went white around the receiver. "That can't be. The sets were dismantled." She stopped. "Thank you," Wolfe said. "That will suffice." The line clicked dead. I watched her lower the phone, staring at it like it had turned witness for the prosecution. "You're thorough," she murmured. "Almost admirable." "I'll pass that along," I said. "He collects adjectives." She rose, crossing to a cabinet. "You think I'd kill for money? For words?" I think people kill for less, I said. You printed beauty and sold it like counterfeit bills. Lytton might have been worse, but you inked the first lie. Her shoulders straightened again, mask reforming. I should have expected melodrama from Wolfe's envoy. Melodrama pays better than poetry, I said. Ask your accountants. She turned away, pouring herself a drink. The ice cracked like punctuation. I'll make a full statement if it pleases him, but I won't confess to murder. Suit yourself, I said. He'll still have the statement transcribed and filed before dinner. That got the faintest twitch of her mouth. He would. When I left, her secretary avoided my eyes, pretending to sort envelopes. Outside, the elevator operator shut the gate with a funereal clang. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was dictating notes to himself, surrounded by index cards like obedient soldiers. The smell of Fritz's veal roast drifted in from the kitchen, punctual as salvation. "Well?" he asked without looking up. "She folded," I said, dropping into my chair. Confessed to forging, denied killing, blamed Lytton for everything but bad poetry. Wolfe grunted. Expected. Fraud is a coward's crime, sufficiently profitable to seduce, insufficiently courageous to conceal. He reached for his beer. You were effective. Thanks, I said. I do my best with gilded sinners. He sipped, swallowed, and regarded me. Mr. Goodwin, your coarse persistence is vital to civilization. Without it, truth would remain an aristocrat's toy. I grinned. I'll embroider that on my tie. He ignored me, as usual. Kramer will need her confession, though he'll mangle it. The missing typesetting slug will interest him more. Yeah, I said. A murderer with a sense of irony. That's Manhattan for you. Wolfe sighed. Bring me the transcript by morning. After dinner, I'll resume thought. He reached for the bell cord. Fritz appeared at the door, serene as always. Dinner is served, sir. Excellent, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin, wash your hands. We dine. I rose. After dealing with publishers, I might need to wash my soul. He allowed the ghost of a smile. That too, if you can spare the water. And with that, the day's masquerade of culture and crime ended the way most of ours do, in the Brownstones' dining room, with good food, unspoken respect, and a case that was only beginning to taste of guilt. By the time the front doorbell went off at 6:45, I was halfway through a report and fully through my patience. The sound had that special resonance that says, trouble doesn't knock, it barges. Fritz was in the kitchen finishing something that smelled expensive, so I went to answer it. Sure enough, Inspector Kramer stood on the stoop, trenchcoat damp, cigar clamped like a weapon, and expression carved from granite. Evening, Goodwin, he said. Tell your boss I'm not here for conversation. I'll alert the press, I said. Come in before the wallpaper peels. He brushed past me, bringing half of Manhattan's November with him. When I followed him into the office, Wolfe was already there, huge, composed, and immovable as a mountain that had heard bad news before breakfast. The glow from the desk lamp caught the brass of the bell cord and the white curve of Wolfe's cuffs. Inspector, Wolfe said, you come as herald or hangman? Both, Kramer said, slapping a folded document onto the desk. Arrest warrant for Stephen Vale. You can read it, but don't start editing the grammar. Wolfe regarded it as though it were a menu in a foreign language. On what grounds? Handwriting analysis, Kramer said. The threatening letters to Marjorie Vale matched samples from his correspondence. Motives solid. He hated his brother, wanted to bury those poems, and Mrs. Vale found out he faked them. 2 witnesses place him near the pavilion the night she died. Wolfe leaned back, eyelids heavy, fingers steepled. Convenient symmetry. It's also nonsense. Kramer's jaw flexed. We've got evidence. You had your chance, Wolfe. This one's on paper. I said, you should copyright that line. Kramer ignored me. He'll be booked by 9. You want to clear your conscience, fine. File it under regret. Wolfe's tone stayed velvet but cold. Your enthusiasm for paper, Inspector, exceeds your prudence. Arresting Vale will gratify the public and confound the truth. You mistake appearance for substance. Kramer bit down on the cigar. I mistake delay for obstruction. Pfui, Wolfe said. You mistake haste for virtue. Mr. Goodwin, please show Inspector Kramer out. Respectfully. That last word nearly made me choke on irony. I got up, but Kramer didn't move. His shoulders sagged a little, the fury replaced by fatigue. You know, he said quietly, There was a time I thought you pulled this high and mighty act to mock us. Now I think you just like watching us sweat." Wolfe's eyes flicked open. "No, Inspector. I detest perspiration in all forms. Good evening." Kramer grunted. "Fine. You win this round, but the DA doesn't answer to you." He turned, brushing past me on his way to the door. I followed him to the hall, held it open. "Send my regards to the DA," I said. "Maybe he'll autograph my next paycheck." "Tell Wolfe," he muttered, stepping into the drizzle. "Truth's not poetry, it's paperwork." When I came back, Wolfe hadn't moved. The warrant lay on his blotter, untouched. He said, "Archie, beer." I poured him one and fetched a ginger ale for myself. The first sip calmed him enough to exhale. "We cannot allow the DA to proceed," he said. "Stephen Vale may be insufferable, but he is not homicidal. We require interference." "That's my department," I said. "Who gets the pleasure of being interfered with?" "Mr. Cohen," he said. "Prepare a note." I rolled my chair to the typewriter. Wolfe dictated in his usual oratorical rhythm. "To Lon Cohen Gazette. Urgent. Reliable source indicates premature arrest in Poet's Pavilion case. Suggest editorial caution before police declare success. Emphasize risk of false confession." He paused, then added, "Confidentially, imply the widow's publisher remains under scrutiny." I typed it up, tore the sheet, and handed it over. He read it, nodded once, and signed. "Deliver to the Gazette immediately. Tell Mr. Cohen it's worth 2 columns. I whistled. "You're leaking to stall the DA." "I'm ensuring respiration for justice," he said. "She is fragile and requires air." I sealed the envelope and set it aside for the evening messenger. "Anything else?" "Yes. Inform Saul Panzer to watch Dane's building tonight. If the woman panics, she may flee or destroy evidence." Before I could answer, Fritz appeared in the doorway carrying a silver tray. "Dinner, gentlemen," he said with serene precision. The aroma hit first. Veal kidneys in Madeira sauce, delicate enough to make a man forget warrants, murders, and editors. Wolfe's expression softened by degrees. "Ah," he said, "you are timely, Fritz." "Always, sir." As Fritz arranged the plates, Wolfe regarded the food with priestly reverence. "Archie, join me." "Sure," I said, settling opposite him. "Nothing like veal kidneys to digest deceit." He gave me a glance that mixed tolerance and mild reproach. "Deceit, Mr. Goodwin, digests poorly. It lies upon the moral stomach like unchewed gristle." "Then here's to chewing," I said, raising my fork. For a while the only sounds were cutlery, the faint tick of the clock, and Wolfe's contented breathing. Finally he said, "Kramer is not a fool. His fatigue troubles me. When integrity tires, corruption thrives." I said, "Maybe he's just hungry. You could send leftovers." He didn't smile, but his eyes flickered. "That would be unkind. He dines on duty, not delicacy." After dinner, I cleared the plates while he dictated another note, this one to the DA himself, full of elegant outrage and veiled reminders of past embarrassments. It was the kind of prose that could make bureaucrats sweat through their suits. When I'd finished typing, Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and said, "Kramer's ultimatum is the symptom, not the illness. We must uncover who fed him his certainties." "Meaning someone planted those letters," I said. "Precisely. Truth, Archie, is indigestible in quantity. It must be consumed in morsels, lest it choke." "That's philosophy with sauce," I said. "Want me to quote you in the Gazette too?" He opened one eye. "Don't be absurd." Fritz returned to collect the tray. Wolfe nodded to him, then to me. "Tomorrow, Mr. Goodwin, we resume work. Tonight I shall consider the digestion of deceit, and whether Kramer will survive it." I stacked the empty glasses, switched off the lamp, and said, "If he doesn't, I'll send flowers, maybe a laurel wreath." "Archie," Wolfe murmured, already sinking into thought, "kindly spare him poetry." "Sure," I said, heading for the hall. "I'll stick to prose and invoices." The afternoon light came in slantwise through the office blinds, the kind that makes New York look like it's been run through a typewriter ribbon one too many times. I was sitting at my desk, flipping through a stack of dog-eared pages that smelled of stale tobacco and literary ambition. The Pavilion's exclusive memorial edition of Adrian Vale's lost poems had been staring me down all morning, and I was just about ready to file it under romantic fraud. Case closed when something twitched in the corner of my eye. I'd seen a lot of poetic crimes in my time, usually unpaid bar tabs, but this one had rhythm. Each stanza began with a capital letter big enough to bruise the page. A, then D, then A again. Half an hour later, after a quick run through the alphabet and 2 cups of coffee, I had a name spelled out down the margin like a secret autograph. Darn Vale. It hit me like a punch from a thesaurus. I leaned back, grinning. Well, bless my limited education, I said aloud. The poet's finally left a calling card. Wolfe's voice drifted from behind his desk without looking up from his dictionary. Mr. Goodwin, when you begin speaking to yourself, I worry for civilization. You'll recover, I said, but you might want to stop pruning vocabulary and look at this. It's worth interrupting even your mental gymnastics. He lifted his gaze, slow and heavy, like the sun deciding whether to rise. Proceed. I crossed the room, dropped the book on his blotter, and pointed to the initials marching down the left side of the page. Every first letter of every stanza spells out something. D-A-N-E-V-A-L-E. Neat trick, huh? Like a poetic monogram. Wolfe's eyes flickered. Indeed. A cipher in verse. Primitive, but elegant. It's more than decorative, I said. It's 2 names jammed together. Dane and Vale. Lila Dane, Stephen Vale. That's your duet. Our murderers librettists. Wolfe pressed a finger to the page, his expression unreadable. They collaborated in forgery. It was lucrative, until the profits became indivisible. She forged, he authenticated. When sentiment decayed into suspicion, blood intervened. Translation: he killed his sister-in-law before she could spill. Precisely. I leaned on the desk. You ever notice how art has the worst manners, always confessing when no one asked? He gave me a look. You are fortunate, Archie, that your untutored but effective pattern recognition compensates for your flippancy. I grinned, meaning I can read sideways. He ignored that, already rifling through the book again. These letters, Danavale, are too deliberate for accident. Concealment as signature, a forger's vanity. The office clock ticked its approval. Outside, a taxi blared, Manhattan's way of applauding genius. I said, So what's next? Send Kramer a sonnet explaining his mistake? Phooey. Kramer has mistaken paper for proof and proof for closure. We must demonstrate the true authorship and motive. He pressed the bell cord. Fritz appeared at the door like a silent punctuation mark. Beer, Wolfe said, and the telephone directory. Fritz blinked once, nodded, and disappeared. Phone directory? I asked. For the pawn shops nearest Beekman Place, Wolfe said. Mr. Vale required money after his partner's collapse. He would not risk banks. You think he pawned something? I think he pawned her. I raised an eyebrow. If that's metaphor, I'm not following. Mrs. Vale's missing sapphire earring, Wolfe said. Its mate was noted by the coroner, the other absent. You recall? Sure. She wore them the night she died. Then one vanished. Vale would not waste sentiment. A sapphire is not verse. It retains value. Just then, Fritz returned with the directory and 2 chilled glasses. Wolfe poured, sipped, and dictated. 3rd Avenue between 42nd and 52nd. Note the names. I scribbled as he spoke. Crown Loan Company, Empire Pawn, Horvath and Son. Have Saul Panzer make inquiries, Wolfe said. He is the only man who can extract information from a pawnbroker without recourse to scripture. I phoned Saul immediately. His calm voice on the line was worth 3 detectives and a priest. Got it, he said. Give me an hour. Wolfe closed his eyes. Meanwhile, compose a note to Mr. Kramer. Brief. Inform him that handwriting is not destiny. Short and sweet, I asked. Short and sour. I typed it up while he rearranged index cards, his mind moving like chess, quiet, unhurried, deadly. The typewriter clacked the rhythm of discovery. An hour and 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Saul's voice came through, steady as a metronome. Got something. Horvath and Son, 49th Street. Sapphire earring pawned 2 days after Marjorie Vale's death. Pawn ticket signed by, get this, Stephen Vale. I let out a low whistle. Beautiful. You're a saint. I'll pick up a photostat, he said. You'll have it in 30. When I hung up, Wolfe already knew. Saul Pantzer, he said, delivers as inevitably as death and taxes. I couldn't help grinning. That's our proof, boss. The man who hated poetry cashed in on jewelry. Motive and stupidity. Perfect combination. He didn't smile, but his voice deepened. Not stupidity, Archie. Compulsion. The need to own even what he despised. He tapped the book again. He helped her forge her brother's work, then turned avenger when she betrayed him with commerce. The poem became confession. So, he killed Marjorie to protect the racket, then killed Lytton when he panicked, and the earring pays his tab. Exactly. The phone rang again 20 minutes later. Saul, this time. One more thing. Checked Dane's Printworks purchases. A rush order for potassium cyanide last week. Signed L. Doran, your Mrs. Dane's pet alias. I'll send a photostat. I passed that up to Wolfe. He studied it, his mouth tightening. Good, he said. Now we may proceed. For a while we sat in silence, the kind that comes right before an orchestra starts playing. The brownstone was warm, the air thick with the scent of Fritz's dinner preparations, something with garlic and moral gravity. Wolfe finally said, "It is time." Time for what? For a full house. Tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock. All participants present. Mrs. Dane, Stephen Vale, Inspector Kramer, Mr. Panzer. You will arrange it. Sure, I said. Want me to add a string quartet? He opened one eye. Your humour is an instrument too often played. Yeah, I said. But it keeps the audience. I finished typing the memo for Kramer, filed Saul's update and stacked everything neatly in the case folder. Wolfe dictated one more note to be delivered first thing in the morning, a summons disguised as courtesy. When I was done, I said, "You realize Kramer's going to blow a gasket when he finds out his warrant's worth less than toilet paper." Wolfe sniffed. If the law chafes, it must learn discretion. That's practically civic advice. Indeed. He reached for his beer, raised it and murmured, "To literacy." I clinked my glass. "To criminals who leave footnotes." He allowed himself the faintest smile. "Archie, you persist in vulgar metaphor, but occasionally it approaches charm." "Thanks," I said. "I'll embroider that one too." At precisely 8 o'clock he would have his showdown, but for now the brownstone was quiet except for the faint whir of the elevator and Fritz's voice in the hall, announcing that dinner was ready. Wolfe rose, slowly, ceremoniously. "Come, Mr. Goodwin, the digestion of deceit requires veal." "Make mine poetic," I said. "Phooey," he muttered, heading for the dining room. "Verse is never properly seasoned." And just like that, the mystery of ink and envy, art and murder, sat simmering in our files, ready for the final stanza. When you've seen as many murder suspects sweating under Wolfe's ceiling as I have, you start to recognize the pattern. First comes the silence, thick enough to chew, then the polite creak of expensive chairs. It was a few minutes before 8, and the brownstone office looked like a courtroom with better lighting. The air smelled faintly of Fritz's polish and someone's nerves, probably Lila Dane's. She sat nearest the window, wrapped in a fur-trimmed coat that had seen better morals. Stephen Vale took the opposite corner, pretending to read the spines of Wolfe's books while fighting the urge to run. Inspector Kramer was on the sofa, heavy as a verdict, cigar unlit but ready. Stebbins stood near the door, his bulldog face broadcasting boredom and suspicion in equal parts. Saul Pantzer, calm as a Sunday sermon, leaned against the wall, our quiet insurance policy. Wolfe occupied his throne behind the desk, a mountain in dark brown silk, fingertips pressed together, eyelids drooping as if justice were a tedious formality. I had my usual station at the typewriter, because someone had to record history before the Gazette mangled it. At precisely 8 o'clock, Wolfe lifted his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth enough to butter toast, "you are here because truth, however reluctant, insists upon audience." Lila tried for a smile. "Mr. Wolfe, I already confessed to forgery. Must we stage it again?" Wolfe inclined his head. "We must, madam, because confession, like verse, often omits what matters." Vale snorted. "Oh, for God's sake, you're not a judge." "No," Wolfe said. "I am a reader, a superior one." He reached for a slim volume on the desk, the forged, collected poems of Adrian Vale. "Permit me a recital." He opened to the marked page and began to read. His voice, deep and deliberate, filled the room with syllables that felt carved rather than spoken. Dreams die not in daylight, nor truth in trade. He paused, turned a page. Another's voice will name what guilt forbade. Kramer shifted on the sofa, unimpressed by poetry. You planning to indict them in rhyme, Wolfe? In acrostic, Wolfe said. Observe the first letters of each stanza. He traced them with a finger. D-A-N-E-V-A-L-E. A cipher, an unintentional epitaph. I watched their faces. Vale went rigid. Dane's lipstick lost its confidence. You can't prove that means anything, Vale said quickly. Coincidence. Coincidence? Wolfe echoed, eyes opening. A poet's widow and a poet's brother conspiring to counterfeit poetry, and their initials entwined throughout the fraud. You tax credulity, sir. Lila's voice quavered. We were partners in business, not in crime. Pfui! Wolfe laid the book flat. You forged your husband's hand. Vale authenticated it. Together you deceived publishers, collectors, and the public. When Marjorie Vale threatened exposure, you sought to silence her. I did not, she cried. He did. She pointed at Stephen Vale, whose face turned the colour of library paste. I? Vale's voice cracked. You're insane. You ordered the cyanide. Kramer leaned forward. Hold it. We've got no record of that. You will, Wolfe said calmly, and nodded to me. I reached into the folder on my desk and handed him 2 photostats. Exhibits, he announced, kindly procured by Mr. Goodwin and Mr. Panzer. The first, a pawn ticket from Horvath and Son, acknowledging 1 sapphire earring, pledged by Stephen Vale the day after his sister-in-law's death. The second, an order slip from Dane's own printworks for potassium cyanide, signed under her pseudonym. One pays for silencing a widow, the other for silencing an accomplice. Lila's hand flew to her throat. That's a lie. Indeed, Wolfe said. Then your signature, like your husband's verses, must be another forgery. Kramer stood, unfolding his bulk like a bear from hibernation. That's enough. Both of you stay put. He motioned to Stebbins, who moved to block the door. We'll verify these down at headquarters. Lila slumped back in her chair, breathing fast. Vale just stared at the floor, whispering something that might have been prayer or profanity. Wolfe closed the book with a soft thud. Inspector, the murder of Marjorie Vale was an act of fear. That of Grant Lytton, an act of desperation. Neither of them was poetic. Kramer grunted. You make it sound like criticism. It is, Wolfe said. Crime, like literature, demands structure. These 2 failed in both. For a moment, nobody spoke. The clock ticked over to 8:30, marking the end of one deception and the beginning of paperwork. Kramer finally exhaled. You'll print this one your way, Wolfe. I trust, Wolfe replied. You'll edit judiciously. Kramer gave him a look that might have passed for respect if you squinted. Come on, Stebbins. Let's get them booked before the DA writes his own poem. Stebbins guided Lila and Vale out, Saul following quietly behind to make sure they didn't improvise an encore. The front door closed and silence returned, thick, satisfied, and faintly tragic. Wolfe leaned back, folding his arms across his middle. Well, Archie? Well, I said, it's nice to know verse still moves people, to cyanide at least. He made a low sound that could have been amusement or indigestion. You trivialize tragedy. I specialize in it, I said. Keeps me young. He eyed me. Mr. Goodwin, you may now record the conclusion. All's verse that ends well. That's my line, I said. But sure, I'll let you borrow it. He didn't smile. Wolfe never smiles, but one eyebrow twitched like it had considered the idea. You persist in jest, yet you recognize pattern. That perhaps is civilization's last hope. Then we're doomed, I said, reaching for the typewriter. While I finished typing the report, he dictated a note for the record. Every comma in its place, every word polished like Fritz's silver. When he was done, he rang the bell. Fritz appeared in the doorway, serene and ready for ritual. Beer, Wolfe said, and cheese. Immediately, sir. When Fritz returned with the tray, the golden bottle gleamed like reward. Wolfe poured slowly, foam precise to the millimetre. I took a ginger ale, out of habit and self-preservation. He lifted his glass. To art, Mr. Goodwin. Its admirers may perish, but the English language endures. I clinked mine against his. All's verse that ends well. His eyebrow twitched again. Tiresome. Predictable, I said, which is how I like my paychecks. He sighed, half closing his eyes. Tomorrow I shall compose a letter to the Literary Society. About what? He gestured vaguely, advising them that the English language once again survives its admirers. I grinned. You ought to copyright that. It's almost poetic. He frowned faintly, but his voice softened. Archie, forbear. Even poetry deserves digestion. Speaking of which, I said, you planning to eat dinner or just philosophize over beer? He glanced at the clock. Dinner at 8:35 is precisely on schedule. Attend me. We moved to the dining room where Fritz had already set the table. The silver gleamed, the napkins stood at attention, and the veal kidneys from earlier had been replaced by roast duck swimming in orange glaze. The scent alone could have cleared a confession from any suspect in 10 seconds. As we sat, I said, you ever notice how every case ends with a meal? You close a murder the way other men close menus. Wolfe carved deliberately. Order, Mr. Goodwin, is the essence of peace. Food is the punctuation of reason. And beer's the paragraph break? Pfui, he said, but it lacked venom. We ate in companionable quiet for a while, the kind that settles only after justice and dessert are both inevitable. Outside, the city hummed its restless tune. Somewhere uptown, Kramer would be writing his report, grousing about Wolfe's interference, but secretly relieved the score was settled. Somewhere else, a printing press would be cooling down, its false verses destined for evidence lockers instead of bookshelves. When Fritz finally cleared the plates, Wolfe leaned back, satisfied. Archie, he said, see that the report and all supporting documents are placed in the safe before midnight. Will do. He nodded once, eyes half closed. Good. Then tomorrow, orchids. That was dismissal, and benediction rolled into one. I headed for the office to file the last of it. The book, the notes, the pawn ticket, the cyanide slip, all neatly typed and cross-referenced. The brownstone felt still again, the air thick with cigar smoke and quiet triumph. By the time I finished, Wolfe had already retreated upstairs to his room, leaving the faint echo of his voice behind like punctuation at the end of a perfect sentence. I switched off the desk lamp, took one last look at the empty chairs, and said to nobody in particular, all's verse that ends well. Then I locked the safe, grabbed my hat, and called it a night.